Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the Phantom Savior. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The door to the roof closed with a sound that was far too final. It was a heavy, metallic clack, the sound of a lock engaging, of a vault ceiling, of a coffin lid sliding into place. Izuku Midoriya stood alone on the concrete expanse, the wind whipping his unruly green hair across his eyes. The sun was beginning its afternoon descent, casting long, bruised shadows across the Muzidafu skyline, bathing the world in a deceptive golden warmth. But Izuku felt cold, a deep, permeating chill that started in the marrow of his bones and radiated outward, numbing his fingertips, his toes, his lips. He stared at the door. Just moments ago, the greatest hero in the world, the symbol of peace, had walked through it. All Might, the man whose smile had been the wallpaper of Izuku's mind for as long as he could remember. The man whose laughter had been the soundtrack to every daydream of justice Izuku had ever entertained. Izuku looked down at his hands. They were trembling. Not with excitement, not with fear, but with the sheer structural failure of his own reality. No, the word echoed in his head, spoken in All Might's reduced, skeletal voice. I cannot simply say you can become a hero even without power. It is not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic, young man. Realistic. Izuku walked toward the railing. His red sneakers, usually so light on his feet as he rushed to catch a villain fight, felt like lead weights. He gripped the cold iron of the fence, his knuckles turning white. He looked down at the city. From this height, the people were just dots. The cars were toys. The world was a sprawling, complex machine, and he was a broken cog that didn't fit anywhere. Realistic, Izuku whispered to the wind. The tears didn't come. He expected them to. He was a crier, everyone knew that. He cried when he was happy, when he was scared, when he was frustrated. But now, facing the absolute destruction of the singular goal that had defined his existence, his tear ducts were dry. It was as if the shock was so profound, his body hadn't processed the grief yet. He had spent 10 years waiting for a late bloomer's growth spurt. He had spent 10 years enduring Bakugo's explosions, the mockery of his classmates, the pitying glances of his mother. All of it had been fuel. He had shoveled every insult and every bruise into the furnace of his ambition, telling himself that one day, he would prove them wrong. One day, All Might would see him, and All Might had seen him. And All Might had said no. The verdict was in. It wasn't just the bullies anymore. It wasn't just the doctor with the X-rays of his double-jointed toe. It was God himself descending from the heavens to tell Izuku Midoriya to find a desk job. He told me to be a police officer, Izuku muttered, a hysterical, dry laugh bubbling up in his throat. Because they get to help too. Picking up the scraps, filing the paperwork while the real heroes pose for magazines. He looked at the notebook in his hand. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The cover was scorched and waterlogged, courtesy of Katsuki Bakugo's palm earlier that day. It smelled of burnt paper and pond water, a fitting metaphor for his life. Trash. Izuku turned away from the railing. He felt hollowed out, as if someone had reached inside his chest and scooped out the engine that kept him moving. He walked back to the stairwell door. He didn't want to go home. He didn't want to look his mother in the eye and see that wavering hope she tried so hard to hide. He didn't want to look at his room, a shrine to the man who had just crushed him. He began the long descent down the stairs. Each step echoed in the empty concrete shaft. Step. You have no quirk. Step. You have no power. Step. You are a liability. Step. You are just Deku. By the time he reached the street level, the numbness had begun to shift. It was souring, curdling into something heavy and acidic in his stomach. He walked aimlessly, his feet dragging against the pavement. The city noise washed over him, traffic, chatter, advertisements blaring from screens. It all felt distant, like he was watching a movie through the wrong end of a telescope. He wasn't sure how long he walked. Time seemed fluid, irrelevant. He just knew that the sun was dipping lower, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. Then he heard it. Boom! The sound of an explosion ripped through the lethargy. It was a sound Izuku knew better than his own heartbeat. He flinched, his head snapping up instinctively. Old habits died hard. His body turned toward the sound before his brain could catch up. A villain attack? A hero fight? He took a step forward then stopped. You need to be realistic. Why bother? Why go watch? Why take notes? He wasn't a hero candidate. He was just a fanboy. A creep with a notebook. He should just go home, study for the entrance exams to a regular high school, and prepare for a life of mediocrity. But the smoke was rising, thick and black, curling into the sky like a darker stain against the sunset. Sirens wailed in the distance, and despite the hollowness in his chest, despite the voice of the number one hero echoing in his ears, Izuku's legs moved. He drifted toward the chaos, not out of excitement, but out of a morbid inertia. He was a moth that had been burned by the flame, but had nowhere else to go. The Tatooine shopping district was in chaos. The crowd was thick, a wall of bodies pressing against the yellow police tape. People were craning their necks, holding up phones, live streaming the disaster. The air smelled of acrid smoke, burning plastic, and the foul, sewage-like stench of sludge. Izuku squeezed through the gaps in the crowd, his movements ghost-like. He didn't apologize as he bumped past people. He barely registered their presence. He reached the front of the barricade and looked up. His breath hitched. It was the sludge villain. The same one that had attacked him under the bridge earlier. The same one All Might had captured in the soda bottle. The bottle that must have fallen from All Might's pocket when Izuku grabbed his leg. My fault, Izuku thought, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. This is my fault. But the guilt was quickly drowned out by confusion. The villain was massive, expanding and undulating, taking over the alleyway. Fires were raging around the perimeter, licking at the walls of the shops. But what confused Izuku wasn't the villain, it was the heroes. They were standing there, doing nothing. Izuku's green eyes, usually wide with wonder, narrowed into slits of sharp, analytical observation. The notebook in his hand felt heavy, but he didn't open it. He didn't need to write this down. He was seeing it with a clarity that hurt. There was Death Arms, the punch-heavy hero. He was standing near the police line, shouting at civilians to stay back. He had charged in once, Izuku noted from the scuff marks on his gauntlets, but he had been repelled. Physical force is useless against a fluid body, Izuku's mind supplied automatically. Punching sludge just displaces it. Death Arms is a bad matchup. But why is he stopping? He has immense strength. He could be ripping up chunks of the pavement to create barricades, or using debris to smother the flames. There was Kamui Woods, the rising star. He was perched on a storefront sign, rescuing civilians from the second floor. He's avoiding the combat zone, Izuku realized. His wood quirk is weak to fire. He's terrified of the explosions. He's prioritizing his own safety and liability over the villain takedown. An empty lady. The giantess. She was standing at the entrance of the alley, rubbing her arm. I can't fit in there, she complained to a nearby cop. It's too narrow, Izuku stared at her. You can't fit? The thought was venomous. Then shrink. Or break the building. Or use your giant hand to create a wind pressure shield to dampen the fire. Do something. They were all just waiting. Where is All Might? Someone in the crowd shouted. Yeah, we need All Might. Until he gets here, the pros can't do anything. Izuku looked at the faces of the pro heroes. He saw hesitation. He saw calculation. They were treating this like a shift at a factory. It's not my job description. I'm not equipped for this. I'll wait for the specialist. They were waiting for the symbol to fix it. They had become complacent. Heroism, Izuku realized with a sudden, sickening lurch, had become a spectator sport even for the heroes themselves. It was a performance. If they couldn't win flashy, if they couldn't win safely, they wouldn't play. You need to be realistic. Was this reality? Watching a villain run rampant because the matchups weren't favorable? Then, through the roaring flames and the thick smoke, Izuku saw it. The villain shifted his bulk, the muck swirling around his hostage. For a split second, the sludge parted, revealing a face. Blonde hair, matted with sweat and grime. Eyes wide, bloodshot, and filled with a terror so raw it pierced through the haze of heat. Katsuki Bakugo was suffocating. His mouth and nose were covered by the sludge. He was thrashing, creating the explosions that were fueling the fires, but his struggles were getting weaker. His eyes darted frantically, locking onto the heroes who were standing 10 meters away, watching him die. And then, Bakugo's eyes found Izuku. There was no arrogance in them now. No pride. Just a silent, screaming plea. Help me! The world stopped. The noise of the crowd faded into a dull hum. The heat of the fire felt distant. Izuku's mind, usually a storm of anxiety and second-guessing, suddenly went terrifyingly still. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The fanba who worshipped these heroes died in that moment, suffocated by the image of death arms turning his back on a dying child. If he had been the old Izuku, the one from this morning, he might have run in screaming, fueled by pure, blind panic. He would have flailed and gotten himself killed, but the Izuku standing there now had been stripped of his illusions. He saw the board clearly. The pros aren't moving. They are waiting for All Might. All Might is out of time. I saw the steam coming off him on the roof. He can't maintain his form. He's probably in the crowd, watching, unable to act. No one is coming. Bakugo has maybe 30 seconds before asphyxiation causes permanent damage or death. Izuku didn't scream. He didn't announce his presence. He simply moved. He ducked under the police tape. Hey! Kid! Get back here! A police officer shouted, reaching for him. Izuku didn't stop. He didn't sprint blindly. He moved with a strange, jerky fluidity, his body low to the ground, using the smoke as cover. His eyes were locked on the sludge villain. Analysis mode. Target, sludge villain. Structure, viscous fluid, likely non-Newtonian given the impact resistance against death arms. Weakness, it needs to hold a shape to possess the host. The eyes and mouth are solid anchors. Target, Bakugo. Status, panic-induced quirk activation. The explosions are making the air turbulent, feeding oxygen to the fire, but also keeping the sludge from entering his lungs fully. He's creating a pressure zone. Izuku was running now, the asphalt hot beneath his sneakers. The villain noticed him. A massive tendril of sludge whipped up, ready to smash the intruder. Another fly? The villain gurgled. Izuku didn't slow down. He ripped the yellow backpack off his shoulders. He didn't just throw it. He swung it by the strap, using the centrifugal force. He wasn't aiming for the villain's mass. That was useless. He aimed for the left eye, which was bulging out of the muck, focused on Bakugo. Variable, projectile weight approximate 3 kilograms. Distance, 8 meters. Izuku released the bag. It sailed through the air, a yellow blur cutting through the smoke. The pencil case inside, hard plastic, slammed directly into the villain's dilated pupil. Gah! The villain recoiled, the sludge rippling violently as instinct forced him to protect his sensory organ. For 1 second, the grip on Bakugo loosened. The sludge receded from his mouth. Bakugo sucked in a desperate, gasping breath. He looked up, coughing, to see Izuku sliding to a halt in front of him within the ring of fire. Deku? Bakugo wheezed, his voice raspy and small. Why? Izuku didn't offer a hand to pull him out. That wouldn't work, the sludge was too sticky. Instead, Izuku spun, grabbing a handful of loose grit and ash from the ground. Shut your eyes and mouth, Kaken! Izuku commanded. His voice wasn't the high-pitched squeak Bakugo was used to. It was flat. Commanding. Bakugo, shocked by the tone, flinched and squeezed his eyes shut. Izuku threw the ash directly into the villain's exposed face as the sludge tried to reform. The grit mixed with the fluid, irritating the sensitive membranes, causing the villain to sputter and lose cohesion again. You little brat! The villain roared, raising a massive arm of sludge to crush them both. Izuku stood his ground. He knew he couldn't stop the blow. He had no strength. He was going to die here. But he had bought Bakugo a breath. He had done more in 5 seconds than the professionals had done in 5 minutes. This is realistic, Izuku thought, watching the shadow of the sludge hammer descend. This is what a hero does. Even if it's pointless. A massive concussion of wind pressure blasted the alleyway. Detroit. Smash! The wind howled, tearing the fires away from the building, scattering the clouds, and obliterating the sludge villain's form into 1,000 harmless droplets. Izuku shielded his face, blown back by the sheer force. He tumbled across the pavement, skinning his elbows, coming to a stop against a brick wall. When he looked up, the rain was starting to fall, a localized downpour caused by the updraft of the punch. And there, amidst the steam and the cheering crowd, stood All Might. But Izuku didn't cheer. He sat on the wet pavement, his chest heaving. He watched All Might pose for the cameras. He saw the way the hero's arm trembled slightly, a tremor masked by a flex. He saw the blood at the corner of All Might's mouth, quickly wiped away before the reporters could zoom in. It wasn't magic. It was just a man, pushing himself past his limit because the system had failed to produce anyone else capable of stepping up. The police and the other heroes rushed in. The spell was broken. The danger was over. Now came the bureaucracy. The aftermath was a spectacle of injustice that Izuku would never forget. He sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a foil blanket draped over his shoulders. He was uninjured mostly. Just scrapes and bruises. But he was being grilled. Death Arms and Kamui Woods were looming over him. "Are you insane?" Death Arms shouted, his face red. "You could have gotten yourself killed. You interfered with official hero business. You have no quirk," Kamui Woods added, shaking his head. "What were you thinking? You were a liability out there. If All Might hadn't shown up, you would be dead, and you would have gotten the hostage killed too." Izuku sat silently, staring at his dirty sneakers. He listened to the lecture. He listened to them tell him how reckless, stupid, and powerless he was. Then, he looked to his right. A few meters away, the press was swarming Bakugo. The pro-heroes were patting him on the back. "That quirk is amazing, kid!" MT Lady was cooing. "You held out for so long. You're a natural-born hero. With a power like that, you'll be a sidekick in no time." Death Arms shouted over to him. Izuku's grip on the foil blanket tightened until the material threatened to tear. They are praising him, Izuku thought, a cold fury crystallizing in his heart. They are praising the victim because his explosion was flashy. He caused the fires. He obstructed the rescue by panicking, but because he has a strong quirk, he's a natural-born hero. And me? I analyzed the weakness. I created the opening. I bought the time. But because I have no power, I am the villain of this story. Hey! Are you listening to me? Death Arms barked, tapping Izuku on the forehead with a heavy finger. Izuku slowly raised his head. He looked Death Arms directly in the eye. The hero paused, unsettled by the dead, flat look in the boy's green eyes. There was no fear there. No apology. Just an unnerving, dissecting gaze that seemed to strip the hero down to his insecurities. "I'm listening," Izuku said quietly. "I'm listening to you explain why you watched a middle schooler suffocate for 5 minutes because you didn't want to get your gloves dirty." Death Arms recoiled as if slapped. "What did you say?" I said. Izuku stood up, letting the blanket fall. "I'm going home." "We're not done here, kid. We need your name for the report." "You don't need my name," Izuku muttered, turning his back on them. "I'm just a liability, right?" "Liabilities don't have names." He walked away. He melted into the dispersing crowd, his head down. He expected them to stop him, to arrest him, but they were too stunned, and frankly, too busy grooming the new celebrity, Bakugo, to chase after a quirkless nobody. Izuku walked. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the neon signs of the city. "Deku!" The shout came from behind him. Izuku stopped but didn't turn. He knew that voice. Bakugo came running up, panting, his school uniform torn and stained with sludge. He stopped a few feet behind Izuku. He was vibrating with adrenaline and humiliation. "I didn't ask for your help," Bakugo yelled, his voice cracking. "I didn't need you. I was fine. Don't think you looked cool. You're still a quirkless loser. You're nothing." Izuku turned his head slightly, looking at Bakugo over his shoulder. Usually, this was where Izuku would apologize. Where he would stutter and try to appease Kaken's ego. Where he would validate Bakugo's superiority. "You would have died," Izuku said. Bakugo froze. "You were suffocating. Your eyes were rolling back. You were going to die, Kaken." Izuku's voice was devoid of emotion. And the heroes were watching it happen. Remember that. When you get to UA, remember that they watched you die. Izuku turned back around and kept walking. Wait! DKU! Izuku turned a corner and broke into a run. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear any more words from heroes or villains or victims. He took a detour on the way home. He avoided the main streets. He stuck to the alleys, the shadows. At one point, he saw a familiar skeletal figure dashing through the streets, looking around frantically. All Might. He was looking for the green-haired boy. Izuku stepped behind a vending machine, pressing his back against the cold metal, holding his breath. Don't find me, Izuku prayed. Please don't find me. If you find me, you'll try to make me feel better. You'll give me a speech. You might even offer me a chance. He realized, with a jolt, that he didn't want All Might's pity. And he didn't want a handout. If All Might came to him now, it would be out of guilt. I don't want to be a hero because someone allowed me to be, Izuku thought as All Might ran past, coughing blood. I want to save people because they need saving. He waited until the footsteps faded before he emerged. He walked the rest of the way home in silence. Izuku! Oh my God! Inko Midoriya was a weeping mess the moment he walked through the door. She had seen the news. She engulfed him in a hug that threatened to crack his ribs, her tears soaking his already dirty uniform. I was so worried. Why did you do that? You could have been killed. I'm okay, Mom, Izuku said, patting her back mechanically. I'm okay. I'm tired. I'm going to take a shower. He extricated himself from her grip and walked to his room. He closed the door and locked it. The room was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights outside. The walls were covered in posters. All Might smiling. All Might smashing. All Might saving. Izuku stood in the center of the room, feeling like a stranger in a museum dedicated to a dead religion. He walked over to his desk. He turned on the lamp. The light pulled on the surface, illuminating his collection of notebooks. He reached into his bag and pulled out Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. He stared at the scorched cover. He thought about the rooftop. Be realistic. He thought about the alleyway. I can't fit. He thought about the police. You are a liability. Slowly, methodically, Izuku opened the notebook. He looked at the notes he had taken that morning. Drawings of Kamui Woods. Speculation on empty ladies' giantification limits. He gripped the page. Rip. The sound was loud in the quiet room. He tore the page out. Then another. And another. He didn't burn the notebook. That was too dramatic. Instead, he dismantled it. He tore out every page of fanboy worship. Every drawing where he had idealized the heroes as gods. He shredded them into a metal wastebasket by his desk. When the notebook was empty, just a hollow shell of a binder, he stopped. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a fresh notebook. It was plain black, purchased in a pack of 5 for schoolwork. He uncapped a pen. His hand hovered over the cover. He closed his eyes and replayed the fight. Not the emotions. The mechanics, the sludge villain. Weakness, eyes, mouth. Fluidity countered by solidifying agents or absorbent materials. Possible countermeasures, liquid nitrogen. Quick dry cement. High-yield flashbangs to disorient. Death arms. Weakness, low mobility. Reliance on brute force. Strategy to defeat, target the joints. Use his momentum against him. Trip wires. Grease, Kamui Woods. Weakness, fire. Psychological fear of heat. Strategy, incendiary devices. Bluffing with flares. Izuku opened his eyes. They were cold, hard, and burning with a new, dangerous light. He wasn't going to UA to be a hero. Not the kind they wanted. He wasn't going to wear a cape and wave to the cameras. He wasn't going to wait for permission to save someone. The system was broken. It was a hierarchy of power, not a service of salvation. The strong were praised for existing, the weak were told to die quietly. If the heroes won't do the job, Izuku thought, the pen hitting the paper, then someone else has to. He wrote the title on the new notebook. The ink was black and permanent. Vigilante Analysis. Practical Application. Volume 1. He turned to the first page. He didn't draw a costume. He didn't draw a logo. He began to sketch a schematic for a high-pressure glove utilizing a grappling mechanism, based on the internal workings of the eraser head capture weapon he had seen in grainy footage online. Izuku Midoriya, the Fanba, had died on that rooftop. The phantom was born in the silence of his room, amidst the shredded remains of his dreams. He wrote until sunrise. And for the first time in his life, he didn't dream of being All Might. He dreamed of the shadows, and the work that needed to be done within them. The concept of time is relative. For the rest of the world, 10 months was just a span of dates on a calendar, a semester of school, a changing of seasons, the countdown to the highly anticipated UA, high school entrance exams. For the aspiring heroes of Muzurifu, these 10 months were a frantic race to build muscle, hone quirks, and memorize history books. For Izuku Midoriya, the last 10 months had been an autopsy. He had dissected his life, removed the parts that didn't work, the hope for a quirk, the desire for fame, the need for validation, and replaced them with something colder, harder, and infinitely more durable. He stood on the edge of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The sun was rising, casting long, rusty shadows across the landscape. To the casual observer, this place was a graveyard of appliances and forgotten dreams. Mountains of trash, tires, broken cars, and rotting furniture choked the coastline, blocking the view of the ocean. It was a monument to society's laziness, but to Izuku, it was a hardware store. He wasn't here to clean it. Cleaning it was a job for a public servant or a community service volunteer. Izuku was here to harvest. He adjusted the straps of his heavy canvas backpack, his eyes scanning the nearest pile of debris. He was different now. The soft, round edges of his face had sharpened. His baby fat had melted away, replaced by lean, wiry muscle, the kind built for endurance and speed rather than brute force. He wore nondescript gray sweats and thick work gloves that were stained with oil and grease. Pneumatic cylinder, he muttered to himself, his voice a low hum. I need a pneumatic cylinder. Preferably from a compact car hood or an industrial office chair. He climbed the trash heap with the agility of a mountain goat. He tested his footing on a washing machine before vaulting over a stack of tires. His movement was efficient. No wasted energy. He spotted it, a rusted hatchback buried halfway up the mound. The hood was crumpled, but the lifting struts looked intact. Izuku pulled a crowbar from his belt. He didn't just rip it off, he examined the leverage points. He wedged the bar into the hinge, applied targeted pressure, and with a sharp snap, the metal gave way. He inspected the prize. The seal on the piston was intact. It could hold pressure. Good, he whispered, stashing it in his bag. This was his life now. School during the day, where he was the invisible ghost of Aldera Junior High. Training in the evening. Scavenging at dawn. He wasn't aiming for UA's hero course. That dream belonged to the boy who died on the rooftop. He had applied for the general education department. It was strategic. UA had the best facilities, the best library, and most importantly, the most advanced support equipment trash bins in the country. If he wanted to operate in the shadows, he needed to be close to the light, leeching off its resources. Izuku looked out at the ocean, visible only through a small gap in the trash. He wasn't trying to become a symbol of peace. Symbols were targets. Symbols were fragile. He was building a ghost. Month 3, the digital underground. Izuku's bedroom had undergone a transformation as radical as his mindset. The All Might posters were gone. The walls were now covered in corkboards pinned with schematics, maps of Muzurifu's crime hotspots, and printouts of police patrol routes. The desk, once used for homework, was now a soldering station. The air permanently smelled of ozone and burning rosin. It was 2 a.m. The blue light of 3 computer monitors illuminated Izuku's face. He was deep in the underground Heroic Support Tech Forum, a corner of the dark web frequented by vigilantes, unlicensed support engineers, and conspiracy theorists. It was a dangerous place if you weren't careful, but Izuku was paranoid by necessity. He used a VPN that bounced his signal through 3 different countries. His username was Viridian. Viridian, the recoil on the pressurized gauntlet is still too high. It's causing microfractures in the bracer casing. Does anyone have a workaround for kinetic dampening without adding excessive weight? He hit enter and took a sip of stale coffee. He expected to wait hours for a reply. Usually, the users here were suspicious of newcomers. A notification pinged almost instantly. Baby_maker_101, OH. Oh. I know this one. You're using standard aluminum alloy, aren't you? Boring. You need to create a floating pivot system. Isolate the impact chamber from the arm brace with a gel layer. Izuku blinked. The enthusiasm was palpable even through text. Viridian, a gel layer? Like a non-Newtonian fluid? Baby_maker_101, exactly. Like cornstarch and water but way cooler. Use a shock-absorbing polymer. If you can't afford the high-end stuff, which you totally can't, judging by your gauntlet problem, try melting down the soles of high-impact running shoes and mixing it with silicone. It's trashy, but it saves the babies. Viridian babies? Baby_maker_101, the inventions. The gadgets. Don't let the recoil hurt your babies. Izuku cracked a small smile. It was the first time he had smiled in days. This user, Baby_maker_101, was clearly insane, but their engineering logic was sound. Viridian, that actually makes sense. If I use a floating pivot, I lose about 5% of the impact force, but I gain 40% durability. Baby_maker_101, you did the math that fast? Oh ho? You're not just a dumb musclehead vigilante wannabe? You're a maker? Viridian, I'm just someone who likes to tinker. Baby_maker_101, boring answer. But I like your brain. Hey, if you're looking for good scrap, stop checking the junkyards. The real gold is in the industrial district dumpsters behind the support companies, specifically Hatsum Industries. Their quality control is super strict. They throw away perfectly good titanium scraps if it has a microscopic scratch. Izuku's eyes widened. Hatsum Industries. Of course. Viridian, thanks for the tip. Baby_maker_101, don't mention it. Just show me the baby when it's done. Izuku logged off, his mind racing. He had been scavenging from the consumer trash at the beach. But industrial trash, that was where the weapon-grade materials were. He looked at the prototype gauntlet on his desk. It was an ugly thing, a mess of pipes, wires, and duct tape strapped to a modified shin guard he was wearing on his arm. It looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Floating pivot, Izuku muttered, grabbing a screwdriver. Let's try it. Month 5. The physicality of silence. It wasn't enough to have the gear. If he couldn't move, he was dead. Izuku didn't have a combat quirk. He couldn't tank an explosion like Bakugo, or harden his skin like Kirishima. If he got hit, he would break. Therefore, the strategy was simple: don't be there. He had no money for a dojo, and no master would train a quirkless kid for combat without asking questions. So, Izuku learned the way he learned everything else: observation and imitation. He found a dilapidated boxing gym in the bad part of town, the kind of place where unlicensed heroes and low-level thugs sparred. He couldn't go in, but the back window was cracked, and the fire escape offered a perfect view. He watched for hours. He analyzed footwork. He memorized how they shifted their weight before a punch. He learned to read the tells, the twitch of a shoulder, the intake of breath. Then he practiced. Every night, Izuku went to an abandoned construction site near his apartment. It was a skeletal structure of steel beams and concrete slabs, a vertical maze perfect for parkour. Run. Jump. Roll. Recovery. He threw himself at the concrete. He fell. He bled. His shins were a map of bruises, his palms calloused and rough. Again, he hissed through gritted teeth, wiping blood from his nose after missing a ledge. He wasn't training to fight like All Might. All Might fought straight on. All Might announced his presence. Izuku was training to fight like a shadow. He incorporated moves from old martial arts videos he found online, styles that had fallen out of favor in the age of quirks. Judo. Aikido. Krav Maga. Arts designed for smaller opponents to neutralize larger ones using leverage and joint manipulation. Lesson 1. The environment is a weapon. Lesson 2. Fear is a distraction. Lesson 3. Silence is better than armor. One rainy Tuesday, he tested himself. He stood at the bottom of a 5-story apartment complex. His goal: reach the roof in under 2 minutes without using the stairs and without making a sound loud enough to trigger the stray dog sleeping by the entrance. He moved. He leaped for the fire escape ladder, catching it with one hand, absorbing the shock with his shoulder to prevent the metal from clanging. He pulled himself up, flowing over the railing like water. He vaulted to the air conditioning unit, then to the drain pipe. His muscles burned. The rain made the metal slick. One slip meant a broken neck. Don't think about the fall. Think about the grip. He reached the roof. He checked his stopwatch. 1 minute 48 seconds. He looked down. The dog was still asleep. Izuku exhaled slowly, the steam rising from his body into the cold night air. He was getting faster. He was getting quieter. He was almost ready. Month 8. The ghost takes shape. The phantom suit was coming together. It wasn't spandex. Spandex offered no protection and no utility. Izuku's suit was a marvel of scavenged engineering, built for urban warfare. The base layer was a dark, ballistic weave he had lucked into finding at a surplus store, fire-resistant and stab-proof, mostly. Over that, he wore modified motocross armor he had painted a matte, non-reflective green, so dark it looked black in the shadows. But the tech was where his genius shone. The boots, iron soles Mk1. Steel-toed combat boots fitted with shock-absorbing springs in the heels, thanks to the car suspension parts from the beach, and magnetic clamps in the soles for stability on metal surfaces. They allowed him to drop from 2 stories without shattering his knees. The gauntlets, impact bracers. Bulky but functional. The right gauntlet housed a high-pressure pneumatic piston. It was a one-hit wonder. It could deliver a punch with the force of a sledgehammer, but it took 10 seconds to repressurize. The left gauntlet housed a grappling line, a winch motor salvaged from a power drill, firing a high-tensile steel cable. The belt, a utility belt crammed with tools. Smoke pellets, potassium nitrate and sugar. Flash bangs, magnesium shavings and camera flash capacitors. Caltrops. Zip ties. The mask, this was the piece de resistance. It started as a paintball mask. Izuku had reinforced it with fiberglass. He added a voice modulator he'd hacked from a toy robot, allowing him to drop his voice an octave and add a metallic distortion. The lenses were replaced with one-way mirrored glass, green-tinted, with a basic heads-up display. HUD, he was coding himself. Currently, the HUD only showed a clock and a compass, but he was working on integrating police scanner frequencies. He put the mask on. He looked in the mirror. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a monster. The green eyes of the mask glowed faintly from the internal LEDs. The dark armor made him look bulky and industrial. The rabbit ear-like protrusions on the cowl, which housed his long-range antennas, gave him a silhouette that was both ridiculous and terrifying. Testing audio, he said. The voice that came out wasn't Izuku Midoriya. It was a digitized growl. Deep. Inhuman. Audio clear. He stared at himself. For the first time in his life, he didn't see Deku. He didn't see the victim. He saw something that could make a villain hesitate. I need a name, he whispered, though he already knew it. The police scanner had been buzzing about a green ghost ever since he started testing his parkour routes. He was the Phantom. Month 10, the debut. It was a Thursday night. A school night. Izuku sat in his room, staring at his math homework, but his mind was vibrating. The police scanner on his desk crackled to life. Dispatch, we have a 10-31 in progress. Mugging near the train station. North exit alleyway. Suspects are armed. Quirks confirmed. Copy that, dispatch. Nearest unit is 10 minutes out. Heavy traffic on Main, 10 minutes. Izuku looked at the clock. 11:42 p.m. In 10 minutes, a mugging turns into a homicide. In 10 minutes, lives are ruined. Izuku stood up. He didn't think about it. The hesitation that had plagued him on the rooftop with all might was gone. The fear was still there, but he had learned to put the fear in a box and use it as fuel. He opened his closet. The suit was waiting. 5 minutes later, the window of the Midoriya apartment slid open. A dark shape slipped out, climbed the drain pipe, and vanished onto the rooftops. The alleyway near the train station was a classic kill box. High walls, one entrance, one exit, poor lighting. 3 thugs had cornered a salaryman. The victim was on his knees, clutching a briefcase, trembling violently. Thug 1 was big, clearly a strength enhancement quirk. His skin looked like gray stone. Thug 2 was skinny, playing with a butterfly knife. His fingers were elongated, spindly like a spider's. Thug 3 was the lookout, smoking a cigarette at the mouth of the alley. Hand it over, old man, Stoneskin growled. Or I crack your skull like a walnut. Please, the salaryman stammered. It's just work documents. I don't have cash. He's lying, Spiderfingers hissed. Cut him. Just a little. Izuku was perched on the fire escape 3 stories up. The rain was drizzling, masking the sound of his breathing. Analysis mode. Target 1, Stoneskin durability high. Blunt force trauma ineffective. Weakness, joints are likely less armored to allow movement. The eyes. Target 2, Spiderfingers reach advantage. Sharp weapon. Weakness, fragile build. Target 3, lookout distracted. First priority. Izuku reached into his belt and pulled out a small metal sphere. A marble. He flicked it. The marble hit the street lamp above the alley entrance. Crack. The bulb shattered. The alley plunged into darkness, lit only by the distant street lights reflecting off the wet pavement. What the hell? The lookout spun around. Who's there? Izuku dropped. He didn't land on the ground. He landed on the lookout. His boots slammed into the man's shoulders. The shock absorbers whined, compressing and releasing. The impact drove the man face first into the concrete. He was out cold before he knew he was under attack. Izuku rolled off him, coming up into a crouch. Hey! Stoneskin shouted, squinting into the gloom. Taka? What happened? Someone's here, Spiderfingers said, his voice trembling. I heard something. Izuku reached into his belt. Flash bang. He tossed it between the 2 remaining thugs. Bang. A blinding flash of white light and a deafening crack filled the narrow space. My eyes! Stoneskin roared, stumbling back, covering his face. Izuku moved. He was a blur of green and black. He sprinted towards Spiderfingers, who was flailing blindly with the knife. Don't engage the blade. Control the limb. Izuku caught the thug's wrist with his left hand. The gauntlet's grip was iron. He twisted, applying torque against the elbow joint. Snap! Spiderfingers screamed and dropped the knife. Izuku swept his legs, kicking the thug's ankles out from under him. As the man fell, Izuku delivered a precise, controlled strike to the vagus nerve in the neck with the hard edge of his gauntlet. The thug went limp. 2 down. 5 seconds elapsed. I'm gonna kill you! Stoneskin had recovered faster than expected. He swung a massive, rock-covered fist blindly. It clipped Izuku's shoulder. Crack! The armor plate fractured. Pain exploded down Izuku's left side. He was thrown against the brick wall, the air driven from his lungs. Heavy. He's heavier than I thought. Can't grapple. Stoneskin focused on the sound of the impact. He charged, head down like a bull. Izuku gasped, forcing air into his lungs. He raised his right arm. The pneumatic piston whined, a high-pitched capacitor charge sound. 1 shot. Izuku thought. He waited. Stoneskin was 2 meters away. 1 meter. Izuku sidestepped to the left, a hair's breadth dodge. As the villain passed him, Izuku pivoted and drove his right fist into the villain's side, right below the ribs, aiming for the liver. He pulled the trigger mechanism in his glove. K-chunk. The piston fired. The steel rod extended 3 inches at the speed of a bullet, transferring all that kinetic energy into a single point. The effect was immediate. Stoneskin's momentum stopped. His eyes bulged. The rock armor around his midsection spiderwebbed and cracked. He made a sound like a deflating tire. Kirk! And crumpled to his knees, vomiting bile. Then, he collapsed face down in the puddle. Silence returned to the alley. Izuku stood over the bodies, his chest heaving. His shoulder throbbed. His HUD was flashing a warning, armor integrity compromised, left pauldron. He looked at his right gauntlet. The piston was smoking. It had jammed in the extended position. Note to self, improve heat dissipation. He turned to the victim. The salaryman was pressed against the wall, his eyes wide with terror. He wasn't looking at Izuku like a savior. He was looking at him like a nightmare, a demon that had dropped from the sky and brutalized 3 men in under 20 seconds. Please, the man whimpered. Take the wallet. Just don't kill me. Izuku froze. This was the part where All Might would laugh. Where he would say, I am here, and the fear would vanish. But Izuku wasn't All Might. He was a guy in a scary mask standing in a dark alley surrounded by unconscious bodies. He reached into his pouch. The man flinched, covering his head. Izuku pulled out a small card. He tossed it at the man's feet. Then, he activated his voice modulator. Call the police. Tell them the trash is ready for pickup. The voice was distorted, guttural, and terrifying. Izuku fired his grappling line at the fire escape above. The motor shrieked, hauling him up into the darkness. By the time the man looked up, the phantom was gone. The aftermath. Izuku sat on the edge of his bed. He had climbed back through the window 10 minutes ago. The adrenaline was crashing. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely undo the clasps of his armor. His shoulder was already turning a nasty shade of purple. He peeled off the bodysuit, and sat there in his boxers, shivering. He had done it. He had fought villains. Real villains. And he had won. He looked at the pile of scrap metal on his floor that constituted his suit. It was damaged. It was ugly. It smelled of ozone and sweat. But it worked. He limped over to his desk and opened his journal. Vigilante Analysis, Volume 1. He turned to a fresh page. Incident Report 001. Location, North Station Alley. Opponents 3, 1 strength, 1 blade, 1 non-combat. Outcome, victory. Injuries, contusion on left deltoid. Equipment failure, piston overheating. Voice modulator volume 2 high. Civilian was terrified. Izuku picked up his pen. He hesitated. He thought about the fear in the salaryman's eyes. Take the wallet. Just don't kill me. He wasn't a hero. Not a hero with a capital H. He wasn't going to be on lunchboxes. He wasn't going to be loved. He looked at the mirror. His reflection was just a tired, bruised, quirkless teenager. Better to be feared by the villains, he whispered to the empty room, than to be ignored by the heroes. He wrote one final line at the bottom of the page. Status: the Phantom is active. He closed the book, turned off the lamp, and for the first time in 10 months, Izuku Midoriya slept without dreaming of apologies. Epilogue: the morning after, Aldera Junior High. The classroom was buzzing. Did you hear? Yeah, my dad is a cop, he saw the report. 3 guys. Totally wrecked. Was it Endeavor? Or maybe Ed shot? Bakugo sat at his desk, feet propped up, scowling at the ceiling. He was listening, though he pretended not to be. They say there was no scorch marks, one student whispered. No ice. No signs of a quirk at all. Just broken bones. Who could take down a rock-skinned guy without a quirk? My dad said the victim described a monster. Said it had glowing green eyes and moved like a ghost. Bakugo's eyes narrowed. Green eyes. He glanced across the room. Izuku Midoriya was sitting at his desk, head down, scribbling furiously in a notebook. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes. He moved stiffly, favoring his left shoulder as he reached for his eraser. Bakugo watched him. He watched the way Deku winced when he stretched. He watched the intense, almost manic focus with which he was writing. Green eyes. TCH, Bakugo scoffed, looking away. Useless nerd. But as he stared out the window, the thought wouldn't leave him. It was impossible. Deku was a pebble. A bug? So why did the description of this ghost make the hair on the back of Bakugo's neck stand up? In the back of the room, Izuku finished his sketch of a cooling vent for the gauntlet. He looked up, catching Bakugo's stare for a split second. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't look away nervously. His eyes were flat, calm, and deep as the ocean. He went back to writing. The Phantom had schoolwork to do. The fluorescent lights of the Muzudafa police precinct hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to drill directly into Detective Naomasa Tsukachi's frontal lobe. It was 1 a.m. Outside, the rain was hammering against the glass, washing the grime of the city into the gutters. But inside, the air was stale, smelling of cold coffee and overworked printer copiers. Tsukachi rubbed his temples and looked at the files spread open on his desk. Case 404, The vigilante phantom. There were no mugshots. There were no fingerprints. There were only blurry photos taken from security cameras, a dark, armored silhouette, glowing green eyes, and the blur of motion. And there were the receipts, notes. Dozens of them. Suspect tied to pole. Fractured radius. Quirk illegal drug trade. Evidence in dumpster behind you, mugger. Unconscious. Wallet returned to victim. Advised patrol route adjustment on 4th and Main, domestic abuser. Restrained. Knife in the drain, he's thorough, a tired voice rumbled from the corner of the office. Tsukachi looked up. Leaning against the filing cabinets, wrapped in a yellow sleeping bag like a depressed caterpillar, was Shota Aizawa. The underground hero, Eraserhead. He's illegal, Eraser, Tsukachi sighed, tossing a photo of a bound villain onto the desk. He's efficient, I'll give him that. Crime in the Tatooine district has dropped by 15% in the last 2 months. But the bureaucracy is breathing down my neck. The Hero Public Safety Commission doesn't like unlicensed actors making the pros look slow. Aizawa unzipped the sleeping bag enough to take a sip from a jelly pouch. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess of black tangles. If the pros were doing their jobs, the kid wouldn't have a hobby. We assume it's a kid? Movement patterns, Aizawa grunted. I watched the footage you sent. He's small. 5'5", maybe 5'6". Agile. High metabolism. He moves like a gymnast, not a brawler. And the psychological profile, he doesn't kill. He doesn't even break bones unless necessary. He leaves notes. He wants to help. He's acting like a hero, Tsukachi corrected. But without a license, he's just a criminal with good intentions. And those are usually the most dangerous kind. Aizawa fully emerged from the sleeping bag, stretching his back. His capture weapon, the gray binding cloth, hung loosely around his neck. You want me to bring him in? I need you to stop him before he gets himself killed, Tsukachi said seriously. The streets are getting rougher. The trigger drug is flooding the back alleys. Eventually, this phantom is going to run into something he can't outsmart with a grappling hook and a smoke bomb. I'd rather we arrest him than zip him into a body bag. Aizawa walked to the window, staring out at the rain-slicked city. He hated the rain. It made the roofs slippery. It made visibility poor. Fine, Aizawa said, his voice flat. I'll catch your ghost. But I'm doing it my way. If he's got potential. I'm not promising I'll hand him over to the wolves at the commission. Tsukachi smiled slightly. Just catch him, Shota. The patrol. Izuku Midoriya sat perched on the edge of a gargoyle extending from the old Gothic clock tower overlooking the shopping district. The rain drummed rhythmically against his armor, a soothing white noise that drowned out the chaotic thoughts usually cluttering his mind. He was soaked, but the suit held up. He had waterproofed the joints with a hydrophobic spray he developed in the school chemistry lab during lunch break. The green lenses of his mask flickered as the HUD refreshed. Time, 2:14 a.m. Battery, 68%. Pneumatic pressure, optimal. Police scanner, silent. Quiet night, the voice modulator rasped in his ear, vibrating against his jawbone. It had been 2 months since his debut. The Phantom was no longer a rumor. He was an urban legend. The internet forums were ablaze with theories. Some said he was a government experiment, some said he was a robot. Others, the more imaginative ones, claimed he was a vengeful spirit. Izuku flexed his fingers, checking the tension on his grapple line. He was tired. He was always tired now. He averaged 4 hours of sleep a night. His grades at Aldera Junior High were slipping slightly, from perfect scores to just above average, but he didn't care. Algebra didn't save lives. This did. He looked down at his hands. The gloves were scarred, the metal paint chipped. Every scratch told a story. A knife slash from a panic thief. A burn mark from a pyrokinetic. A dent from falling 3 stories into a dumpster. He was getting better. Stronger. But the fear never left. It just changed shape. It wasn't the fear of getting hurt anymore. It was the fear of not being enough. You need to be realistic. All Might's voice was a ghost that haunted him on these rooftops. Every villain he stopped was an argument against that sentence. Every person he saved was a rebuttal. Crack. A sound cut through the rain. Not thunder. A gunshot. Izuku's head snapped toward the east. The sound detection algorithm in his cowl isolated the frequency. Distance, 400 meters. Location, the industrial park near the abandoned textile factory. Izuku didn't think. He moved. He stepped off the gargoyle, free-falling for 2 seconds before firing his left gauntlet. The grapple line hissed, the steel tip biting into the corner of an office building. The winch screamed as it retracted, swinging him in a wide arc. He released the line at the apex of the swing, soaring over the street, landing in a roll on the adjacent roof. He was running before he fully stood up. The textile factory was a skeletal husk of rusty beams and shattered windows. It was a popular spot for deals that preferred the dark. Izuku crouched on a steel beam in the rafters, looking down. 3 cars were parked in a circle, headlights illuminating a tense standoff. Group A, the Yakuza. Shy Hasaikai low levels, judging by the plague masks. Group B, street thugs. Rough, unorganized, looking to buy. That wasn't the deal. One of the thugs shouted, waving a pistol. You said $5,000 for the crate. The price of trigger has gone up, a Yakuza member said smoothly. He was tall, wearing a white overcoat. Supply and demand? The heroes are cracking down. I ain't paying double. The thug fired another shot into the air. Izuku analyzed the scene. 6 hostiles. 3 armed with firearms. 2 unknowns Yakuza. 1 likely strength enhancer. Environment, cluttered. Rusted machinery. Lots of cover. Tactics, divide and conquer. Izuku reached for a smoke pellet. Wait! A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't the cold rain. It was that feeling again. The sensation of being watched. He froze. He slowly turned his head, scanning the shadows of the upper rafters. Nothing. Paranoia? No. I trust my instincts. He looked back down. The deal was escalating. The thug was pointing the gun at the Yakuza member now. If he didn't act, blood would spill. Focus, he whispered. He dropped. He landed in the center of the circle, between the headlights. The splash of his boots hitting the wet concrete sounded like a thunderclap in the tense silence. What the? Izuku didn't give them time to process. He threw 2 spheres to the ground. Flash. Bang. The warehouse erupted in white light. The thugs screamed, blinded. Izuku moved like a wraith. He swept the leg of the gunman, disarming him with a sharp twist of the wrist. He used the momentum to spin and fire a pneumatic punch into the solar plexus of the second thug. The man folded. The Yakuza members were faster. They hadn't panicked. The tall one lunged, his arm transforming into a long, bladed tentacle. Quirk, biomorph. Izuku ducked under the blade, feeling the wind of it slice the air above his cowl. He slid across the wet floor, firing his grapple line at a hanging engine block above the Yakuza's head. Heads up, the modulator growled. The cable tightened. The engine block rusted through its chain and plummeted. The Yakuza member looked up just in time to dive away. The engine smashed into the ground where he had been standing, cracking the concrete and sending debris flying. Retreat! The Yakuza leader shouted. It's a pro! They scrambled into their cars. Engines roared. Izuku stood up to pursue, but his danger sense flared again. Louder this time. Screaming, he stopped. He looked up toward the catwalks. A figure was standing there. Standing perfectly still. Dark clothing. A long, floating scarf. Yellow goggles hidden under messy black hair. Eraser head. Izuku's blood ran cold. The Yakuza cars screeched out of the warehouse, peeling away into the night. The thugs Izuku had knocked out were groaning on the floor, but Izuku didn't move. He couldn't. He was staring at the man who could turn off gods. Eraserhead jumped down. He didn't land with a heavy thud like All Might. He landed silently, his knees bending to absorb the impact, his scarf floating around him as if it had a mind of its own. He stood 10 meters away. You're fast, Aizawa said. His voice was bored, tired, but underlined with steel. Sloppy on the landing, but fast. Izuku didn't speak. He calculated the distance. 10 meters. He's in range. The police are getting annoyed, Aizawa continued, taking a step forward. And when the police get annoyed, I get less sleep. I don't like getting less sleep. Izuku took a step back. Aizawa's hair suddenly spiked up. His eyes glowed red behind the goggles. Erasure. Izuku felt nothing. He had no quirk to erase. The familiar hum of power that usually vanished for Aizawa's targets wasn't there. Aizawa frowned. He must have realized it too. The phantom didn't falter. He didn't look confused. No quirk? Aizawa muttered, mostly to himself. Or a mutant type? No, your silhouette is human. I'm just passing through, Izuku said, his voice modulator distorting his fear into a metallic baritone. You're under arrest, Aizawa said. Vigilantism Act, Paragraph 4. Unlicensed use of a quirk, or unauthorized use of support weaponry. Take your pick. The capture scarf shot out. It was faster than it looked on TV. Much faster. It was a gray blur, aiming to wrap around Izuku's torso. Izuku's analysis kicked in. Material, carbon nanotube and steel alloy weave. Reacts to the user's subtle movements. It's not prehensile. He whips it. Izuku didn't dodge away. He dodged into it. He dropped to his knees, sliding forward on the wet concrete. The scarf whipped over his head. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly. He closed the distance. Izuku was now within striking range. He didn't attack. He threw a smoke pellet directly at Aizawa's feet. Poof! Thick gray smoke exploded, smelling of sulfur. Cheap trick, Aizawa grunted. He didn't cough. He spun, anticipating an attack from behind. But Izuku wasn't attacking. He was running. He sprinted toward the shattered window, vaulted onto a rusted conveyor belt, and launched himself into the rainy night. You're not getting away, Aizawa said. He fired his own capture cloth, hooking onto a beam, and swung after the vigilante. The chase. The rooftops of the industrial district were a treacherous playground. Uneven heights, rusted metal sheets, slippery vents, and large gaps between buildings. Izuku ran. He breathed in a 2-2 rhythm. In, out, out. He heard the snap of cloth behind him. Aizawa was gaining. He's fast. Faster than me on the straightaways. I have to lose him in the verticality. Izuku reached the edge of the warehouse roof. The next building was a grain silo, 15 feet away and 10 feet down. He jumped. He landed on the curved surface of the silo, his magnetic boots clamping onto the metal. He slid down the side, using the friction to control his descent. Aizawa landed on the top of the silo a second later. He looked down, seeing the green streaks sliding away. He has gear for everything, Aizawa noted. Magnetic adhesion. Izuku hit the ground and sprinted into a maze of shipping containers. This was his element. Close quarters. Line of sight breakers. Aizawa dropped into the maze. He moved silently, listening. Izuku pressed his back against a red container. He held his breath. He disabled his suit's cooling fans to reduce noise. Think. 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 Eraserhead is an ambushed predator. He relies on disabling the enemy and then restraining them. He struggles against mutant types and heteromorphic types who rely on physical stats. I am functionally a quirkless fighter with support items. Erasure does nothing to me. But his scarf, that's the problem. If it touches me, it's over. Izuku peeked around the corner. Aizawa was walking down the main aisle of the containers, looking left and right. His hair was down. He was blinking. Izuku's mind raced back to his notebooks. Eraserhead's dry eye. The weakness of his quirk. But more importantly, the weakness of his fighting style. He relies on the capture weapon to bridge the gap. He's a mid-range fighter. But the weapon is controlled by his hands. If his hands are busy, Izuku saw a stack of empty oil drums precariously perched on a container above Aizawa. I'm sorry, Eraserhead. Izuku fired his grapple line. It hit the drums. He yanked. The drums came crashing down with a deafening metallic clamor. Aizawa reacted instantly. He looked up, his scarf shooting out to deflect the drums. He batted them away effortlessly, his reflexes god tier. But for that split second, his scarf was extended upward. His torso was open. Izuku burst from cover. He didn't run away. He ran at Aizawa again. Aizawa saw him. Persistent. He tried to retract the scarf to intercept, but the physics of the heavy weave meant there was a lag. A fraction of a second. Izuku slid under Aizawa's guard. He reached out, not to hit, but to touch. He slapped a small, adhesive disc onto Aizawa's belt buckle. Then he rolled past him, sprang up, and vaulted over a fence. Aizawa spun around to pursue, but a high-pitched beep stopped him. He looked down at his belt. The disc. Explosive? Aizawa froze, bracing himself. Pop. It wasn't a bomb. It was a canister of expanding foam, the kind used for riot control or quick repairs. A massive glob of pink, rapidly hardening foam exploded outward, encasing Aizawa's belt, his hips, and the lower half of his capture scarf in a sticky, solidifying mess. You have got to be kidding me, Aizawa growled, struggling to move his legs. The foam was like cement. He watched the green figure reach the top of the adjacent building. The phantom stopped. He looked back. For a moment, hero and vigilante locked eyes across the rain-soaked alley. Then, the phantom raised a hand in a hesitant, almost respectful wave, and vanished into the night. The evidence. It took Aizawa 20 minutes to cut himself out of the foam using his tactical knife. He was soaked, cold, and incredibly irritated. Rational deception, Aizawa muttered, scraping the last of the pink gunk off his boots. He used the threat of an explosive to make me flinch, buying time for the foam to set. He knew I would prioritize defense over pursuit. He looked around the alley. The kid was long gone. He was about to leave when he saw it. Stuck to the side of the shipping container, pinned by a shuriken. Where did he even get a shuriken? Was a piece of paper. It was waterproofed, laminated in cheap plastic. Aizawa walked over and pulled it free. It was a page torn from a notebook. But it wasn't a taunt. It was a diagram. It was a sketch of Aizawa himself. Detailed. Obsessive. There were arrows pointing to his shoulders. Note: when using the binding cloth for a horizontal sweep, RTL, you tend to drop your left elbow by 5 degrees. It creates a blind spot in the lower right quadrant of your defense. A villain with low ground mobility, like Stain or a crawler type, could exploit this for a hamstring tendon sever. Note: your goggles fog up in high humidity/rain. Hydrophobic coating recommended. Brand suggestion: Hatsum Industries Clear Sight Gel. Note: please don't arrest me. I'm just trying to help. You're my favorite hero. Aizawa stared at the note. The rain dripped from his nose onto the plastic. His favorite hero, Aizawa deadpanned. He looked closer at the handwriting. It was frantic, messy, scribbled in a rush. But the observation, it was accurate. Painfully accurate. Aizawa did have a bad habit of dropping his elbow due to an old injury he hadn't fully rehabbed. No villain had ever noticed it. Most pros hadn't noticed it. This kid noticed it while being chased at high speeds. Aizawa folded the note and put it in his pocket. He tapped his earpiece. Tsukachi, did you get him, Eraser? No, Aizawa said. He escaped. There was a pause on the line. He escaped, you? He trapped me with industrial sealant. He's resourceful. I'll put out an APB. Wait, Aizawa said. He looked up at the rooftop where the phantom had vanished. Don't raise the threat level yet. I want to handle this personally. Why? Is he dangerous? He's dangerous, Aizawa admitted. But not in the way we thought. He's not using a quirk, Tsukachi. I erased him. Nothing happened. No falter. No confusion. He kept coming. He's quirkless? Tsukachi sounded stunned. Quirkless. And terrifyingly smart, Aizawa said. He's analyzing us. He knows how we fight better than we do. Aizawa turned and began the long walk back to the precinct. He's not just a vigilante, Aizawa murmured to the empty alley. He's a fanboy with a death wish and a tactical mind. If the villains catch him before I do, they'll kill him. Or worse, they'll recruit him. The ghost returns. Izuku tumbled through his bedroom window and collapsed onto the floor. He didn't bother taking the armor off immediately. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily in the dark. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, thump, thump. He had fought Eraserhead. And he had lived. He started to laugh. It was a shaky, breathless sound that bordered on sobbing. I survived, he whispered. He sat up, wincing as his muscles protested. He pulled off the helmet. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. He looked at his desk. The vigilante analysis notebook lay open. He had left the note. Was it too much? Was it arrogant? Would Eraserhead be mad? Probably, Izuku thought, biting his lip. He hates irrational things. Giving advice to the person chasing you is irrational, but he couldn't help it. He couldn't watch a hero, his hero, have a flaw that could get him killed. Izuku stood up and walked to the corkboard on his wall. He found the picture of Eraserhead he had pinned there months ago. He moved it from the heroes section to the center of the board, right next to the threats list. He took a red string and connected Eraserhead to his own profile. He knows now, Izuku realized. He knows I have no quirk. He knows I study them. The game had changed. He wasn't just a nuisance anymore. He was a puzzle. And Shota Aizawa was the kind of man who didn't stop until the puzzle was solved. Izuku touched the glass of the window, looking out at the sleeping city. Come and find me, Eraser, Izuku whispered, a small, determined smile touching his lips. I'll be ready. He turned off the light. The phantom was gone. Deku went to sleep. But in the darkness of Muzurifu, the legend was growing. And in a police station downtown, a tired man with dry eyes was reading a note from a ghost, realizing that for the first time in years, he had found a student worth teaching, if he could only catch him first. Yue High School was a fortress of glass and steel, a gleaming H shining against the blue sky. It was the mecca of heroism, the place where legends were forged and dreams were either gilded or crushed. For thousands of applicants, walking through those gates was the ultimate victory. For Izuku Midoriya, it was just cover. He sat in the back row of Class 1C, General Education. To his left sat Hitoshi Shinso, a boy with gravity-defying purple hair and bags under his eyes that rivaled Izuku's own. To his right was a girl silently reading a magazine about fashion trends. The teacher, a droning man named Ectoplasm, or perhaps a clone of him, it was hard to tell, was explaining the nuances of quirk law history. Izuku spun his pen between his fingers. Rhythm, spin, catch, tap. Spin, catch, tap. He was bored. Intellectually, he was starving. The general education curriculum was rigorous by normal standards, but for someone who spent his nights calculating trajectory arcs for grappling hooks and synthesizing sleep agents in a bathtub, high school history was sedative. He hadn't applied to the hero course. He knew he wouldn't pass the practical. Robots required brute force to destroy. Yue's exam was flawed, biased toward physical emitters and mutants. He had taken the written exam for General Ed and scored a perfect 100%, securing his spot effortlessly. Why be here? Why torture himself by being adjacent to the dream he had abandoned? Resources? Izuku glanced at the clock. 12:30 p.m. Lunch. As the bell rang, the students filed out toward the cafeteria, eager for Lunch Rush's cuisine. Izuku packed his bag efficiently. He didn't head for the cafeteria. He headed for the labyrinthine corridors of the East Wing, the support course, the workshop of madness. Technically, General Ed students weren't allowed in the support development studio without a pass. But Izuku had discovered within his first week that the security system on the side door had a 3-second lag if you tripped the motion sensor and then swiped a magnetic strip, like, say, a library card, at a specific angle. He slipped inside. The workshop smelled of grease, heated metal, and potential. Sparks showered from the ceiling. The sound of power drills and hydraulic presses filled the air. Izuku walked to the back, toward a pile of failed prototypes destined for the scrap heap. This was his gold mine. Yui threw away technology that was decades ahead of the consumer market. Hey! You! Glitch boy! Izuku froze. He turned slowly. Hovering over him, perched on top of a pile of tires, was a girl with pink dreadlocks and crosshair eyes that zoomed in and out like camera lenses. She was covered in soot. May Hatsum. I told you, Izuku said, his voice low, my name isn't Glitch Boy. It's Midoriya. Whatever. May hopped down, landing with a heavy thud thanks to her hydraulic boots. She grabbed Izuku's arm and dragged him toward her workbench. I saw your post on the forum last night. Viridian, right? The one asking about the kinetic dampeners? Izuku looked around nervously. Keep your voice down. May ignored him. She shoved a strange, bulky bracer into his chest. I made it. Based on your math. But I improved it. I swapped the silicone gel for a non-Newtonian fluid mixed with microscopic iron filings. When you run a current through it, BM, instant solid state. Maximum impact absorption. Izuku looked at the device. His eyes lit up, the Deku mask slipping for a moment. Magnetorheological fluid? That's genius. It would reduce the recharge time on the piston because you wouldn't need to wait for the pressure to reset, you just cut the current. Exactly. May grinned, her face inches from his. You're the only one on that forum who speaks my language. Everyone else is just make it go boom, handsome. But you care about the specs. She narrowed her eyes. So? Are you gonna test it for me? The Hero Course snobs won't touch my babies. They say they explode too much. Do they? Izuku asked. Only the good ones, she winked. Izuku ran his hand over the metal casing. This was the partnership he had cultivated. He gave May the theoretical math and the field data, anonymized, of course, and she gave him the prototypes that were lost or broken. I'll test it, Izuku said. But I need a favor. I need access to the long-range communication array schematics. May raised an eyebrow. Planning to hijack a satellite? Just trying to improve my reception, Izuku lied smoothly. May shrugged and tossed him a tablet. Don't break it. And bring me back the data on the bracer. I want impact reports. Bone density stress tests. The works. You got it. Izuku shoved the bracer into his bag and turned to leave. As he reached the door, the school-wide alarm system blared. WOP, WOP, WOP. Security Level 3 breach. All students, please evacuate calmly. Izuku stiffened. A Level 3 breach? That meant someone had gotten onto the campus grounds. Probably just the press, May muttered, turning back to her blowtorch. They'd been swarming the gate all morning looking for All Might. Izuku nodded, but a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He slipped out of the workshop. He didn't evacuate. He went to the window overlooking the main gate. He saw the crowd of reporters pushing through the shattered barrier. It looked like chaos, but Izuku's eyes caught something else. The barrier hadn't been broken by force. It had been disintegrated. The edges were dusty, crumbling into ash. Decay? He pulled out his phone. He had hacked into the UA server's trash folder weeks ago, where the auto-deleted schedules went. Class 1A, Hero Basic Training. Location, Unforeseen Simulation Joint USJ. Time, 1300 hours. Teacher, All Might, Eraserhead, 13. Izuku looked back at the disintegrated gate. This wasn't a press intrusion. This was a test run. A declaration of war. And Class 1A was the target, the infiltration. The USJ was located off-campus, isolated in the mountains. Too far to run. Too far to bike. Izuku stood in the locker room of the gymnasium, which was currently empty due to the evacuation drill. He opened his locker, the one with the false back he had installed. Inside hung the suit. It had evolved since the alleyway. The armor was sleeker now, integrating carbon fiber plates he'd scavenged from the support trash. The mask was more streamlined, the rabbit ear antennas shorter and more durable. He stripped off his school uniform and donned the black and green armor. The magnetic locks hissed as they sealed. He strapped on the utility belt. He slid May's new bracer onto his right arm. He checked the HUD. System online. Stealth mode, active. How do I get there? He muttered. He couldn't take a vehicle. He would be spotted. He remembered the delivery trucks. Lunch Rush got supplies delivered daily at 12:45. The trucks left the campus and headed back toward the city, passing the highway turnoff for the USJ. Izuku sprinted out the back exit. He saw a refrigerated truck pulling away from the loading dock. He fired his grapple line. The hook caught the rear bumper. The winch screamed, hauling him through the air. He landed on the roof of the truck, his magnetic boots clamping down silently. He crouched low against the wind, watching the scenery blur by. Hold on, Eraser, Izuku thought, the image of the tired hero flashing in his mind. Don't do anything irrational. The nightmare at the USJ. When the truck neared the turnoff, Izuku detached. He rolled onto the asphalt, the kinetic dampeners in his suit absorbing the impact of the 60 km/h drop. He scrambled up the embankment and sprinted through the woods. He reached the dome of the USJ 10 minutes later. The security sensors were down. The lights inside were flickering. Izuku climbed the exterior wall, using the maintenance rungs. He reached a ventilation shaft near the apex of the dome. He used a laser cutter, another handsome reject, to slice the lock. He slipped inside. He was on the catwalks, high above the facility. The view made his blood run cold. The central plaza was a war zone. Dozens of villains were swarming the area. In the center, near the fountain, stood a massive, hulking beast with an exposed brain, the Noma. Beside it was a man covered in hands, Shigaraki, and a mistman, Kurogyri. And fighting them alone, surrounded by a sea of thugs, was Eraserhead. Izuku zoomed in with his mask's lenses. Aizawa was moving sluggishly. His elbow, the one Izuku had warned him about, was lagging. He was overwhelmed. "Where is All Might?" the handman screamed, scratching his neck violently. "He was supposed to be here." Izuku scanned the rest of the facility. The students had been scattered. Landslide zone, fire and ice. Todoroki seems to be handling it. Mountain zone, explosions. Bakugo and Kirishima. Shipwreck zone, silence. Izuku focused on the shipwreck zone. A massive artificial lake. He saw ripples. He saw shadows moving under the water. And huddled on a sinking ship in the center were two small figures, Tsuya Adri, Minoru Mineta, and they were surrounded. "Priorities," Izuku hissed. "Aizawa is holding the line. The students are the weak link." He tapped his belt. Smoke pellets. Taser discs. Flash bangs. He moved along the catwalks, a silent phantom in the rafters, heading for the water. The shipwreck zone. "Mineta, stop crying," Tsuya said, though her own voice wavered slightly. "The villains are waiting for us to enter the water. We're gonna die." Mineta wailed, clinging to the railing of the sinking boat. "I never even got to touch a boob. This is the worst ending ever." The water around the boat churned. A shark-like villain breached the surface, snapping massive jaws. "Come on in, little heroes," the villain taunted. "The water's fine." Suddenly, the villain's head snapped back. A small, silver disc had attached itself to his forehead. ZZZRT, a high-voltage shock discharged. The shark villain convulsed, eyes rolling back, and he floated face down in the water. "What the?" Another villain, this one with squid tentacles, looked up. "Who did that?" Up in the darkness of the ceiling beams, a pair of green eyes glowed. Izuku dropped. He didn't aim for the boat. He aimed for the mast. He swung around it using his grapple line, using the momentum to launch himself toward the cluster of villains in the water. "Incoming!" Izuku threw 3 spheres into the water. Flash bangs. Underwater explosions were amplified by the pressure. Boom! 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 Geysers of water erupted. The villains screamed, clutching their ears, their equilibrium shattered by the concussive force. Izuku landed on the deck of the ship, crouching in front of Tsuyu and Mineta. "Who?" Tsuyu started, eyes wide. Izuku didn't look at them. He looked at the water. "Can you swim fast?" His voice was the modulator's deep growl. "Why yes," Tsuyu stammered. "But Mineta." "Grab him," Izuku ordered. "The shockwave bought you 30 seconds. Swim to the shore. Do not look back." "But who are you?" Mineta squeaked. "Move!" Izuku roared. Tsuyu didn't argue. She wrapped her tongue around Mineta and dove into the water, swimming rapidly away from the disoriented villains. Izuku stayed on the boat. He wasn't fleeing. He was the rearguard. A villain with a water gun hand shook off the dizziness and aimed at the fleeing students. "Not so fast." Izuku raised his right arm. The handsome gauntlet hummed with power. He fired the piston, not at the villain, but at the deck of the ship. Crack! The wood splintered. Izuku grabbed a jagged plank of debris and hurled it like a javelin. It struck the villain's water tank, rupturing it. The pressure release sent the villain spinning backward into his comrades. Izuku checked his HUD. Sector clear. He fired his grapple hook back up to the ceiling, ascending into the darkness just as the villains began to regroup. "A green ghost?" Tsuyu whispered as she hauled Mineta onto the shore, looking back at the empty boat. The fall of Eraserhead. Izuku raced back to the Central Plaza catwalks. The situation had deteriorated. Aizawa was down. The Noma sat on top of him, snapping his arm like a twig. Izuku flinched, feeling the phantom pain in his own arm. The screams of the pro-hero were cut short as the Noma slammed his head into the concrete. Cool, Shigaraki chuckled. Eraserhead is cool. But he's not the final boss. Shigaraki turned his gaze toward the water zone, where Tsuyu and Mineta had just dragged themselves onto land. Izuku, looking down, saw Shigaraki's hand twitch. Let's hurt the kids, Shigaraki said softly. Maybe that will summon All Might. Shigaraki lunged. He was fast. Much faster than he looked. He was upon Tsuyu in seconds. His hand reached out for her face. Azuri! Mineta screamed. Aizawa tried to lift his head, to activate his quirk, but the Noma slammed him down again. No one can stop it, Izuku realized. I can't stop it. But his body moved anyway. He dove from the catwalk. A 40-foot drop. He didn't have time to grapple. He adjusted his body in midair, aiming not for Shigaraki, but for the space between Shigaraki and Tsuyu. He threw a canister. It wasn't smoke. It was a chemical compound he had mixed for riot control, a hyper-concentrated capsaicin cloud mixed with an adhesive resin. Crash. Izuku landed in a roll, the impact jarring his teeth even with the dampeners. The canister exploded between the villain and the student. A wall of burning, sticky red mist erupted. Gah! Shigaraki recoiled, clutching his face. The resin burned his eyes and coated his hands, making it momentarily impossible for him to touch anything with all 5 fingers. Izuku stood up, placing himself between the students and the villain. Get back, the phantom growled. Tsuyu stared at the armored figure. You, from the ship. Don't touch him, Izuku warned, not taking his eyes off Shigaraki. His quirk is decay. 5 fingers. Keep your distance. Shigaraki scratched at his neck, the skin flaking away. His eye peered through the fingers of the hand mask on his face, burning with hate. A player too? Shigaraki rasped. You're not a hero. No license. No costume registry. A glitch. Nomu, Shigaraki commanded. Kill the glitch. The massive bird monster turned its head. It released the unconscious Aizawa and stood up. It was faster than the eye could follow. 1 second it was there. The next, it was in front of Izuku. Izuku's danger sense screamed. Death. 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 He didn't try to punch. He didn't try to block. He dropped a flashbang at his own feet and fired his grapple line directly upward. The Noma's punch obliterated the space where Izuku had been standing a millisecond before. The wind pressure alone sent Tsuyu and Mineta tumbling backward. Izuku dangled 10 feet in the air, swinging wildly. Speed God tier. Power, All Might level. Weakness, none observed. It's unbeatable, Izuku breathed. The door to the USJ exploded. I am here. The voice boomed like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the dome. All Might stood in the smoke, his suit stripped of his blazer, his smile gone. He was furious. Izuku felt a wave of relief so potent it almost made him drop the line. All Might! Mineta sobbed. All Might moved. He took out the minor villains in a blink. He scooped up Aizawa, Tsuyu, and Mineta, moving them to safety near the entrance. He stopped and looked up at Izuku, who was still hanging from the ceiling. For a second, All Might's blue eyes locked onto the green lenses of the Phantom's mask. There was recognition there. The size. The movement. Yum. All Might started, then stopped himself. Get to safety. All Might turned to the Nomu. The clash of titans began. The calculation of victory. Izuku retreated to the high ground, perched on a broken floodlight. He watched the fight. It was terrifying. Every punch created a shockwave. The water in the lake rippled. The glass of the dome shattered. But Izuku wasn't watching the spectacle. He was analyzing. The Nomu isn't dodging. It's tanking the hits. Shock absorption. But Shigaraki said shock absorption, not nullification. Every material has a limit. He saw All Might's punches getting faster. He was trying to overwhelm the absorption. But Izuku saw something else. Steam. All Might was steaming. He was pushing past his time limit. He was getting slower, not faster. He needs an opening, Izuku realized. He needs one clean hit to the vitals to finish it. The mist villain, Kurogyri, materialized. He was trying to coordinate with the Noma to bisect All Might using a portal. Now, Noma! Hold him! Shigaraki yelled. The Noma dug its claws into All Might's weak spot, his side injury. All Might roared in pain. Kurogyri expanded his portal to cut All Might in half. No! Izuku screamed. He looked at his gear. What did he have? Flashbangs? Useless. Smoke? Useless. He had one shot left in the pneumatic gauntlet. And he had the grapple hook. He looked at Kurogyri. The mist had a physical body somewhere. The metal neck brace. Physics, Izuku told himself. It's just physics. He leaped from the floodlight. He didn't aim for the Noma. He aimed for Kurogyri. He fired the grapple line. The hook snagged the metal brace around Kurogyri's neck. Get over here! Izuku yelled, unintentionally channeling a pre-Quirk-era video game. He retracted the winch at maximum speed. Kurogyri, who was focused on All Might, was yanked violently backward. The portal wavered and collapsed just as the Noma tried to push All Might through it. What? Shigaraki screamed. The glitch again. All Might felt the pressure release. He didn't waste a moment. He saw the phantom swinging through the air, dragging the mist villain away. Thanks! All Might bellowed. He gripped the Noma. Plus Ultra! All Might delivered a punch that defied physics. It didn't just hit the Noma, it hit the air behind the Noma, sending the creature rocketing through the ceiling, into the stratosphere, and out of sight. The shockwave cleared the facility. Izuku landed skidding on the concrete, releasing the grapple line from the dazed Kurogyri. Silence fell over the USJ. All Might stood amidst the dust, steam pouring off his body. He was trembling. He held his pose, bluffing. Now, All Might said, turning to Shigaraki. Who's next? Shigaraki took a step back. He was trembling with rage. You cheated. You cheated. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire echoed. Pro-heroes, Snipe, Nizu, and others, appeared at the entrance. Snipe fired, hitting Shigaraki in the limbs. They're here, Kurogyri gasped, warping to Shigaraki. We must leave, Tamura. The villains vanished into the mist. The escape. The danger was over. The pros were securing the perimeter. Izuku looked at All Might. The hero was deflating. The steam was getting thicker. He was about to revert to his skeletal form. And the students, Kirishima and Bakugo, were running toward him. If they see him revert, the symbol dies, Izuku thought. Izuku reached into his belt. He had one last trick. A chemical compound meant for emergency cover. He slammed a large canister onto the ground between All Might and the approaching students. Whoosh! A massive wall of thick, green smoke erupted. It smelled like mint and sulfur. It was opaque. What the hell? Bakugo shouted, skidding to a stop. Another villain? Inside the smoke, Izuku grabbed All Might's arm. Can you move? Izuku asked, his voice modulator off, whispering. All Might looked down. He was half skeleton now. He looked at the armored boy. You! All Might wheezed. The rooftop. Not now, Izuku hissed. Cementos is putting up a wall. Go behind it. Transform back when you're hidden. Izuku shoved the number 1 hero towards safety. As the wind from the ventilation system began to clear the smoke, Izuku ran. He sprinted for the maintenance tunnels. Hey! You! Bakugo shouted, seeing the green silhouette dashing away. Get back here! Bakugo fired an explosion, propelling himself forward. He was fast. Izuku didn't look back. He vaulted over a pile of rubble, slid under a fallen beam, and reached the ventilation grate he had loosened earlier. He dove inside just as Bakugo's explosion scorched the wall next to him. He scrambled through the dark tunnel, heart pounding. Who the hell was that? Kirishima asked, running up to Bakugo. Bakugo stared at the dark hole in the wall. The smoke swirled around him. He recognized the movement. He recognized the desperate, frantic strategy. Deku? Bakugo whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. No. That's impossible. The green ghost. 2 days later, the classroom of 1A was buzzing. The attack on the USJ was national news. Did you see the news reports? Kaminari asked, leaning back in his chair. They didn't mention the other guy. The other guy? Jiro asked. The guy in the armor. Mineta shouted, standing on his desk. He saved us. He had glowing eyes and he was like Zap and POW. He took out the shark guy. I saw him too, Tsuyu said, her finger on her chin. He threw that stuff at the hand villain. He saved Mr. Aizawa. I saw him pull the mist guy, Todoroki said quietly from the back. His timing was perfect. He created the opening for All Might. So who is he? Uraraka asked. A pro? There's no registered hero with that gear, Ida said, chopping his hand. I checked the database. It is vigilantism. Illegal acts, who cares? Hagakure chirped. He was cool. They're calling him the Green Ghost online. Bakugo sat silently at his desk. He was staring at the door. The door opened. Aizawa walked in. He was wrapped in bandages from head to toe, looking like a mummy. Morning, he mumbled. Sensei. You're alive. The class chorused. My well-being is irrelevant. More importantly, the fight isn't over. The class stiffened. The sports festival is approaching. Cheers erupted. But amidst the excitement, Bakugo's mind was elsewhere. Later that day, during lunch, Bakugo was walking down the hallway. He passed the general education classrooms. He looked inside Class 1C. Izuku Midoriya was sitting at his desk. He was asleep, head on his arms. His left arm was twitching slightly. Bakugo walked in. The other students looked at him, intimidated by the hero course student. Bakugo slammed his hand onto Izuku's desk. Bang! Izuku jolted awake. What? Kaken? He rubbed his eyes. He looked pathetic. Tired. Weak. Where were you on Tuesday? Bakugo demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Tuesday? Izuku stammered. I was here. During the alarm. I was in the shelter with the other Gen Ed students. Liar, Bakugo hissed. Ask Shinso-kun. Izuku pointed to the purple-haired boy. I was sitting next to him. Shinso looked up, bored. Yeah. He was drooling on my shoulder. It was gross. Bakugo glared at Shinso, then back at Izuku. The alibi was solid. Or Shinso was lying. You're up to something, Deku, Bakugo growled. I don't know how. I don't know why. But I know you. Bakugo leaned in close. If I find out you're playing hero, I'll kill you myself. Bakugo turned and stormed out. Izuku watched him go. He let out a breath he had been holding. He looked at Shinso. Thanks, Izuku whispered. Shinso shrugged, returning to his book. You owe me a smoothie. And you better tell me how you hacked the security footage to loop yourself into the shelter feed. Izuku smiled weakly. Strawberry or mango? Mango. Izuku looked down at his arm, hidden under his sleeve. A fresh bruise from the recoil of the gauntlet was throbbing. The green ghost had survived. But the shadows were getting crowded.